John O'Sullivan, you are an operator and a brain that I've been waiting to talk to for a long time. Welcome to Tourpreneur.
Thank you very much. Good to be back with a new face behind the helm.
John, if anyone's watching on video right now, they're going to see that the label next to your name is 1 Minute Tours and not Depot Ventures. And so I'm wondering if you could tell me in 1 minute to live up to the name, 1 Minute Tours, if you could
hmm
just give me a quick overview of your path in the tour operator world.
Yeah, so I've been a tour operator for 6, 7 years now, a tour guide for 10 plus years. But during the pandemic, I started getting really into video, social video, and just failed and failed and failed again until all of a sudden I discovered TikTok and have started a social media presence that's kind of outpaced the business a little bit in terms of the media exposure. I actually just earlier today was on Minnesota Public Radio. I was in the studio getting interviewed on their midday program. I've been on every local news affiliate here in the Twin Cities. And so I'm in a moment of discernment of how I introduce myself. Am I Depot Adventures, which I also am, or am I 1 Minute Tours? Well, right now the wave seems to be 1 Minute Tours. So I put that on my subtext for the video.
John, you have an American accent. Are you from the United States?
I am born and raised in Minnesota, but I went overseas 12 years ago to go find myself, do a gap year, spend 1 year overseas, and then it ended up being 12 years. I just returned in November because I felt like there was a better opportunity here in the US for a tour operator. I continue to operate my Australian business from here, but then I'm also firing things up in Minnesota.
Did you become a tour guide when you moved over to Australia?
No, I've been before. I was working at a hostel in Wales, and then a tour guide came through every 2 weeks at this hostel, and it seemed really cool. And she worked for Haggis Adventures, which is a same parent company as Bus About. And so I got referred onto that. So my first job was giving tours to 52 people on a bus going through 26 countries in Europe. It was amazing stomping ground to kind of cut my teeth and they did an intensive 6 week training trip, which is like boot camp style, militaristic, and really built me into the tour guide that I became today. So did that, did a bunch of other stuff in Europe, worked for Sail Croatia, worked for Sandemans, worked for Strawberry Tours. And then when I went to Australia is when I had my first kind of semi-successful business venture.
You and I have similar paths in that we both started in this industry as guides before we became operators. I'm curious what some of your, I don't know, learnings or words of wisdom are about that time as a guide that you still take with you today as an operator. What did you learn at that boot camp?
I mean, I think as a guides, we innately understand the very high pressure situations that can arise from being on the road, and you deal with all manner of situations from just not connecting with a group, kind of boring versions, to someone falling down the steps in front of the hydrofoil going out to Capri in Italy, and you have to decide whether to bring your 40 people on the hydrofoil or to look after the one person who might need medical attention, and you need to decide in 2 minutes because the boat's leaving right then. Those kind of high pressure situations. That's something that happened to me in my first year of guiding. Um, and so I think that we operators that have been guides have a better understanding of not just the numbers, and in fact, often guides have the worst understandings of the numbers, and I speak for myself with that. But we also understand what the key requirements are of delivering a really good product. And so that's one of the superpowers I think that I have is I can land in a city and start writing a tour pretty quickly after getting there.
What are some of those key aspects that you think about that makes a phenomenal experience?
Um, I think that it is important to not think about the specific city. Like the city doesn't matter, like that you're in. You think about the structure. So in my case, I've got a formula I've developed where I have every tour I give is 3 hours, no matter what it is. Every tour starts with this intro and ends with this outro, and it has two tentpole stories, kind of at the 1/3 and 2/3 mark, where it's like a big picture thing. They always have some inclusion that makes people feel welcomed, whether it's a coffee or a beer or a dinner or that sort of thing. And that's where I start from. And then I go find in the city things that work within that framework, as opposed to landing in, say, I'm in Minneapolis right now and thinking, well, gosh, I've got to talk about the Mill District because we're a famous flour milling town. Um, because if you start from there, you don't have the structure that works for a tour. Because what I found here developing tours is that the milling district is just god awful in the wintertime. Nobody wants to be in the middle of the Mississippi in minus 20 degree Fahrenheit weather. And so you start with a structure and you bend the city into that structure, so that you can deliver a good product.
That's fascinating because, I'm a New Yorker, and oftentimes as a local, you're actually blinded to the way a traveler from outside perceives what is exciting or what's worth spending time in. And I think, we can sometimes suffer from that sort of expert blindness of thinking this is what a tour must be in my city. This is if
Hmm.
we didn't do this, it would be crazy. And
Yep.
yet for you, beginning with that kind of structure that works on an emotional and connection level with your guest allows you the freedom to sort of almost, I guess, disregard some of that received wisdom about what you're supposed to do and create something that works as an
Oh,
experience.
I'm in a conversation about this right now. So I'm just building my guide team. So I've hired 3 tour guides here, and we had one of our first team meetings a few weeks ago. And our tour keeps running long. It's a 3 hour tour, but I want them to hit the bar. We finish at a bar. I want them to hit the bar at 2.5 hours in, so that we can sit down for a half hour and just converse. It doesn't. So it's not like a tour. It's just like I want a human connection. But we kept getting to the bar at like 2 hours and 57 minutes. Just wasn't enough time to have that organic conversation. The tour itself, imagine it like it kind of goes in a semicircle. So it starts, imagine, at point A, and then it goes to point B. And we were going on a near circle is what it was looking like to get from A to B. And so I said, you know what we got to do? We got to pick a side of the circle. We're either going to go on the bottom half or the top half of the circle. So if it's the bottom half of the circle, that means we're going to go see the mansions of Summit Hill. We're going to go down to the downtown area of St. Paul, and then we'll finish at the pub near there. Or the other option is we'll go up via the Capitol and see some of the memorials of the Capitol building, and then come down. My guide team really resisted this because they couldn't figure out how to kill their darlings, to use an expression. Like they couldn't figure out, like, how do I give a tour that doesn't include the Capitol, that doesn't include the mansions? And I need to work on this as a manager because I've been through this decision point enough times that it was kind of like a boring conversation for me because I already knew what the answer was. It was, we're going to do it. We are going to cut half the tour out, and you, as a tour guide, will find a way to make the tour be really good, even in spite of the fact that you aren't visiting the Capitol. Um, and that's something that I've learned over time is like a good tour guide should be able to make going through a cornfield in Iowa interesting and engaging. It doesn't matter what you actually do on the tour. The buildings don't matter. The history doesn't matter. It's, can this tour guide convince you that where you are at this moment in time is important?
One of the one of the phrases that is trite but comes up in the book The Experience Economy a lot is just that a traveler is looking for time well spent. That an
Mm-hmm.
experience is about the time that you have together feeling meaningful. And is seeing this thing that everyone expects to see meaningful? Well, it might be, but it doesn't have to be the only path towards a connection between the place and the guide and the travelers. And you're right that that magic can come in so many other ways. And actually, more the more often it's unexpected and different, the more magical it is.
Mm.
A Capitol building can only be so special because we already kind of expect it. You go to Washington D.C., you expect that you're going to go to that. The
Yeah.
the wow moments come from when the guide reveals something different or takes you on a trajectory that was unexpected.
I was just listening to the episode yesterday with Tony at Urban Adventures, who I've worked with a lot. I used to run Urban Adventures in Melbourne, and something that he taught me and that Urban Adventures taught me generally is the idea of a landmark with a twist. So yeah, everyone's going to go to the Empire State Building, but how do you add to that? So you use the gravitational pull of the Empire State Building to drive customers in, but then you don't actually make the tour of the Empire State Building. You go to someplace that's different and interesting and off there. That's one of the big kind of lessons I took away from my time there.
How do you go about balancing the talent, the skills, the personality, the initiative that your guides have to do their thing and have their opinions and have their stories with what you need to achieve as a business owner? I'm wondering what that process looks like.
I think as I've gotten some more experience building teams in a few places, I've gotten less and less interested in training someone in an actual tour. If I need to train them in on how to give a tour that I've already failed, it's the recruitment phase that I need to focus on. I've basically, if I get an application from someone who's a historian, I just discard it immediately. Historians are typically the worst applicants that I get because they think they want to be a tour guide, but they don't actually. Oftentimes, I'm speaking with very broad brush here, but they don't often have the most important skill, which is the emotional intelligence of what does this person want from me right now? How long should this story be? In my kind of business, at least, which is oriented around out of towners coming to the Twin Cities or Melbourne or Sydney once and then probably never again. What is the most important thing we can share with them in the next 2 hours? And if it's a detailed history of the French fur trade, well, we're not really doing them a service. So for me, I look for really compelling people, beer makers, stand-up comedians, actors, tattoo artists. These are the kind of people who have worked with me in the past and been some of the most memorable guides that I've had. Um, Single moms are amazing. Single moms are some of the best tour guides that I've had because they're really good at just working really hard and multitasking and being able to read a room. So anyway, these are the profiles that I look for in the recruitment phase, and then the training. These are just I take them on my tour, and then I take them on another guide's tour. They shadow another guide's tour. I give them a bullet point list of like, hey, here's what our marketing says of where we're going to go to. Good luck. And then the first tour they give is always going to parrot the people they've shadowed. But eventually, if I've done well in the hiring process, I come back in a month or two, and it's a totally different tour because they've found that agency to share the stories they want to tell. I could care less if someone tells the story of Cass Gilbert building the Minnesota Capitol. I tell that story. I'm interested in it. But if someone else is not interested in it, then they should not be telling that story.
I think sometimes a guide feels the weight of, I must talk about this.
Mm.
I must address the year this was built and the architect and the style of the column because that's what a tour guide does. There's this sort of received wisdom that dates from an era, a very bygone era of the tour guide as the information keeper. And in this new era where the information is prolific, the guide has to be doing something different. They need to bring a different skill set to the experience.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to think about what is our defensibility in the age of Wikipedia. Like there is no piece of information that we are going to offer to our guests that they couldn't have found on their own. And so if that's the case, then well, what service are we really delivering to them? Like, yeah, you know what? I use Wikipedia and I use books by the Minnesota Historical Press, and I commit a lot of things to memory where I can, but that's not actually that useful. It's not anything my competitor won't be able to do, and it's not something that my client themselves couldn't just go do on their own. And so the question becomes, what is it we're doing here? And so to me, my reason for being, from a customer facing perspective, is I want to give you a local mate in every town you go to. That personal recommendation of someone who is just sharing with you their life, that's the experience that we can defend against, not the Minnesota State Capitol was constructed in 1905.
So you're talking a lot about Minnesota right now, but you started touring as a company owner in Australia. So I do want to talk about this potential of diversification of your business by entering into different cities. This is often the holy grail of operators who have big wide eyes for scaling their business. They can see opening up all sorts of cities around the world and creating this global empire. what I see is not a lot of companies that have gotten there.
Yeah.
That there aren't a lot of day tour global brands. You
Mhm.
you span the entire globe, Minnesota to Australia, or Minnesota and Australia.
Right.
So I'm, excuse me. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the expansion model of a day tour operator, not just saturating their market, but looking to other cities and what that experience has been like for you.
Yeah, I got some interesting insight from this, having worked with Sandemans and Urban Adventures, seeing both these operators trying to be global operators, but they both push the risk outward to other businesses. In that both these operators didn't take the punch of having below minimum numbers under tours. That risk was always held by DMCs, essentially. By
Mhm.
often these DMCs are just one person DMCs of a guide. But that's the only experience I've had of seeing how these global day tour operators can work. And so I have always had this dream, I guess, this hope that the thing that we can do that's really unique is not have a really strong brand and then push on to other people the execution of delivering on the tours. It's let's figure out how to systemize this is how a tour will work in a city, and then take on the risk of hiring someone and expand to a bunch of cities. That was kind of the dream I had a few years back. And what I've learned is that it's really hard to get that capital, to get the capital where it's worth where you are able to take on enough risk of hiring someone that you don't know and then sending them to some city you're not in and hoping that they do right. So I've never been able to make that work. I lived in Melbourne, and so Melbourne is now successful because it's been going for 6 years, and I've developed deep roots with our partners and our staff, and I've got a really like solid connection with the people who work down there, a personal connection. Now I'm in St. Paul and giving tours in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the reason is because personally, it was just time for us to live in the USA. I was a young kid and wanted him to be a relationship with his grandparents, and so the personal life kind of pushed me down the rabbit hole of expanding to Minnesota because having an operator in Melbourne and Minnesota makes zero sense.
Both start with M.
Oh yeah, you got that, I guess. But what you've got is me. I am in the city that I need to be developing, which is the Twin Cities. Melbourne can operate without me physically being there because I have the relationships where I can communicate in absentia. But I need to be here in the Twin Cities right now. And what I've started to realize, started to kind of come to grips with, is perhaps the only expansion strategy that I know how to do is going to be me going to new cities and starting them up and getting them firing on all cylinders and moving on. So it's not the most scalable model in the world, but I've gotten comfortable with the idea of if I can have successful walking tour operations in Minnesota, in Melbourne, and let's say London as well, because I really want to be in London, then that means I can fly between each of those places and have operations in the places that I just want to be personally. It's a completely selfish endeavor. I moved away from the idea of trying to justify it from a business perspective.
It's really interesting. I had a conversation with Lauren Eloise of Devour Tour, the co-founder of Devour Tours, and her advice to food tour operators looking to scale was precisely the opposite, which was don't try to be the person that has to go and create the new city on your own by yourself, the new partnerships. Find the right person in that city that you can partner with that has those relationships that you can leverage to make sure that it happens faster than you having to build out everything from nothing.
Mm-hmm. Is there a question? Sorry.
I don't know. Is the question is? It seems to me that you're advocating that you've got to be there to make it happen. That there isn't a shortcut to finding the right person on the ground. Let's say you want to go to.
I
Let's
can't
say you want to
I
go to
can't defend it.
Chicago. What do you do?
Yeah, I can't defend it. I can't defend it from a business perspective.
Okay.
I've got zero defense on it. Uh, but it's it's how I've been able to figure out how to make it work. I think like when I do an analysis on what my skill set is, it is not the operational playbook of, having binders and binders full of information that I can hand to someone else and have them run off, like Lauren was saying on there. But the unique skill that I do have is I'm pretty good at making shit happen. Pardon my French, when I get into a city, like I will strong arm my way into a bar and like have that chat with the bartender that you never can get the commercial arrangement over email with the bar owner, and just make stuff work. And I've found that skill set is one that is unique to my personality type. I haven't found as many very many people who are able to just show up and make a tour happen. Um, yeah,
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You know what you bring to the table, and you're 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 turning that into a value prop for your tours and for your company.
it sounds like I'm tooting my horn. It's an indictment, really. Like I'm not skilled enough as a business person to systemize it and become this global superpower that I had this dream of doing. But I've started to get comfortable with that. Like I don't I think I've had enough years on this earth to know what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, and I've come away with the idea. You know what? I don't think I am the person to be in 50 cities and all the capital cities in the U.S., for example. So I'm
Well,
not
let's
going to
talk
be
about that. You're in two cities. Are they operated under the same brand?
same brand, different entities, corporate entities, with a informal license agreement from one to the other. I didn't really know what to do because I was coming over here and I wanted to do tours over here, and I'd already done all this branding work on Depot Adventures. It was supposed to launch in April of 2020, and we know how that went. And so I had this new brand that I just introduced. I started out as Walks 101, then I became Depot Adventures, and I wasn't going to go and start a whole new brand again. I'd just gone through this whole thing, so I just said, "All right, we're just Depot Adventures Minnesota," and that was that. Um, and then I rebuilt our website earlier this year and worked with a really great agency in Melbourne called Ground Zero Digital. Recommended, thumbs up, for anyone who's looking for a good agency. They're like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to have a website that targets SEO keywords for Melbourne and for Minneapolis? It doesn't make any sense. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And so what we did is we played dress up and pretended we were a global operator. And so I picked all the cities where I could imagine myself operating in at some point in the future. And so when you go to our website, you see a drop down menu of Los Angeles and Chicago and Minneapolis, St. Paul and Sydney and London. And really, the only pages that are populated with tours are Melbourne and Minneapolis and Sydney. But the other ones are affiliate links. So we'll see if we can turn that into another commercial play of getting some affiliate traffic over to Get Your Guide. That was the only way I could justify a company that exists in such disparate two places. And probably in hindsight, I should have just started a new brand over here because it is very confusing.
Let's talk about that brand level of operating in multiple cities. What does it bring from the consumer's perspective, in your point of view, that the tour that I'm booking is a global brand? And I ask this because I know a lot of companies
Oh
that
yeah.
are thinking about wanting to be expanded. Does that lend authority to the customer, or does it make the customer say, wait a minute, I want something really local and really authentic, and here I
No,
am. It's the McDonald's of tour brands.
No, I don't think it does anything. I don't think it does anything negative for the customer. I think you will get the drawbacks of like, oh, it doesn't look like a janky website operated by some guy with a clipboard who's like surfing all day. Like that, there is a cool authenticity to that as a customer.
I
But on the
assume you're
flip
talking about
side,
Australia.
yeah, surfing in Minnesota is not as good. But I think the flip side is that I have the overhead of two different operating entities to contribute to the website. And so I'm pretty proud of how our website looks. I think it looks a lot more professional than it has any right to be. And my evidence of that is that I show up on a tour and I tell people I'm the owner, like, oh my gosh, you're the owner. They think I'm like an Amazon or something because our website is really sleek, and it makes it look like it's not just like a operate. We've got 5 employees in Melbourne, and we have 3 employees in 4 employees in Minnesota. But our website looks like we're some big operator. I think the advantage of being a multi-city operator is much more on the operational side. Is like it's much easier to just figure out oh, well, we do our scheduling on this piece of software and our reservations on this piece of software, and we already have relationships with all these OTAs, and so we can just double our sales channels immediately. That's the advantage is more from a sales side and the operational side. From a customer side, it's kind of a wash in terms of the advantages and disadvantages.
It's a really good looking website. I think it's a great model that
Thanks.
all of our audience should be looking at. And one of the things that I love is that you highlight your guides on the
Hmm.
homepage. You
That was
even
a
call
big,
them,
big directive.
yeah, you even call them out by name. We'll talk about tour guides in a second, but I do want to sort of put a button on this global brand issue by talking about entering a market like the United States, where you have cities, New York City, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., saturated with
Mhm.
OTA listings, with high cost of PPC, and a very well developed sort of tourism walking tour ecosystem. You're entering more mid market. And what has that experience been in a city like Minneapolis, and I really want to get your opinion specifically in terms of how you enter that from a sales perspective. How do you start selling? Do you are you beholden to the OTAs? Are you able to sort of develop a brand and do some more boots on the ground relationship building? What has been your strategy and what's been working?
I partner with the OTAs. I don't have the money for the PPC campaigns, and so the OTAs are running my marketing strategy to start. And I think that's what more people should do. I think there's like this intense skepticism that people have with our OTA partners, and they are partners and do an incredible service to us because I
Who's paying you? Tell me who's paying you right now.
I'm serious. Like, I think that we, as small operators, have this incredibly hostile relationship. At least from what I read in the Tourpreneur Facebook group, and when I talk to other operators, everyone just gets so bent out of shape about the percentage they're taking. But the service they're delivering, like, you can't. I'd be very surprised if you can get that volume that they get with the percentage of revenue that they're able to attract a customer for. So in the early days, I just copied and pasted what we were doing in Melbourne. So we had a TripAdvisor account or Viator account already. I just replicated that over here in the Twin Cities using my knowledge of what works on that platform. And like, we've grown much faster than we did in Melbourne here in Twin Cities because we were able to just let the OTAs do all our work for us. And then slowly but surely, I've kind of come up the rear and started doing my own marketing efforts. So I've done these social videos, for example, that are starting to connect. And it's a much longer process, I think, of finding what marketing strategy is going to work for direct sales. And I probably won't have a good answer for another couple of years, which is just that's my process. So the OTAs are keeping me afloat for now, and then slowly I'll be able to change the ratio. But in the meantime, I'm just going to price my tours appropriately. So you'll see my tours are priced at a premium price. I charge more for a walking tour than you can get a Segway tour for here in Minneapolis. And that's fine.
You say that's fine, and it's because you're finding customers and they're writing rave reviews, and
Yep.
is that the secret? Basically, you
Yep.
deliver on it, and the reviews do the work.
Well, yeah, and also the OTAs have a perverse incentive to want to give customers a worse value. that from an OTA perspective, they charge a percentage, so they want your ticket price to be higher. And so I
Mhm.
think, especially with these small shops that we have in the tourpreneur community, we have an attachment to this idea of like, oh, am I really giving $100 of value? Do I feel good about taking $100 to give a tour? And that's just, to me, a question I stopped asking. Like, it's the answer of if you should be charging $100 to give a tour is if someone will give you $100. And in my case, 5 years ago, I charged $29 for my bar tour in Melbourne, and today I charge $99, and it's the exact same tour. And every time I've increased prices, I've also increased volume because it's just given us more money to play with marketing, and also made us be a sustainable business from a margin perspective.
A lot of that money that you are earning is going to your guides. I know you to be one of the approximately three global operators that I know. I think I mean that. I think I literally mean three operators that I know globally. I know Aquila at Unexpected. I know John Laverne at Bulldog Tours. Um, hire your guides as full employees.
Yep.
And that's an extreme risk because you're looking at an unpredictable tour season and saying, I'm going to commit to you as someone in my tribe, in my company. And so,
Mhm.
what has that journey been to lead you to make that decision? And what are you doing as a business owner to make sure that it's not just an act of largesse, but also a shrewd business move?
It is a shrewd business move, and it's a move that everybody should be doing. If you're operating with freelancers, I would put money on that you are doing it in a nature that if it were put under a microscope, you could be a recipient of fines and legal challenges to it. Because to operate in a true freelance relationship, in terms of what I see, how we in the Tourpreneur community operate, you need to do all sorts of things. Like it's very difficult to give people uniforms, for example, to wear if there's freelancers, and it's very difficult to tell them that they have to go on this prescribed route if they're a freelancer. There's all sorts of legal challenges to using freelancers. And the reason for that is that we as a society have decided collectively that if you work for a company, that company has a responsibility to protect you. And in our industry, people have sidestepped that responsibility by passing off risk to their guides. As an example for this, every tour guide job I worked at before I started my company, there was no liability protection for me as a guide. There would often be something written into a contract that said I assumed liability protection, but I can count on one hand the number of people that I knew personally who actually went out and got public liability insurance. And that is a tremendous risk, both for our guests and for our guides, and frankly for the companies that are running these, because it's an unethical way of operating to do something that you know is uh, putting people at risk. And so, if someone gets hit by a bus on your tour, and you're a freelancer working for an operator, um, you can get fined or jail time for that. It is a responsibility of operators to make sure that we are compliant. And so, to me, it's not really it's not a decision point. Like, we have mechanisms in our society to um, tell employers or tell companies how they should treat their employees. And the way we're treating these people as tour guides is as employees. And so it's like a 1 + 1 = 2 sort of question for me.
How do you two objections I can hear our audience saying? I'm going to speak
Sure.
on their behalf. One is you are in a situation in which, because of OTAs and other pressures, you are being squeezed into the commodification of our industry and a price sensitive product that can't afford that luxury. Second objection, and I know I've heard this many times, is the seasonality of the job. I need 45 guides for 8 weeks out of the year. What the heck am I going to do for the rest of the
Yeah.
year? Or I'm exaggerating, but to me,
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
are the objections I see the most often in the community.
Keep hitting me with them. I love to bat these down because number one, the objection about pricing. If you can't afford to run your business ethically, then you shouldn't be running your business. End of sentence. Like this idea of like, oh well, my competitors are making me keep my price down. No, they're not. They're not keeping a gun to your head and saying that you have to price below them. Price what you need to price, and then find a way to deliver on that tour. Maybe that means that you have to give the tours personally in the early days because you can't afford those wage costs. Maybe it means that you can't scale as quickly, but it's not a valid reason to say, oh well, I can't charge the price I need to because you're choosing what price you should be charging, and you need to find a marketing strategy that works for that, or change from a commodified product over to one that has more protections. I've heard you guys talk about a lot. Option two is I don't understand the seasonality objection. There's part time contracts, casual contracts, and the three countries that I've operated in. And so it's a seasonal job, and it's a hiring challenge to be sure. But I don't know. I should acknowledge here that I'm talking about a very specific part of our industry. I do know that there are companies that work with freelancers in a professionalized sense, and they do make them show their liability insurance, and that there is like what's the name of the U.S. organization of tour directors, of multi-day tour
Yeah, the
directors?
NFTGA.
Yeah,
There's, for example, good resources out there, and you as an
yeah,
operator could even pay it. It's $100 liability insurance for the guide that protects them
yeah.
doing their job for you. Yeah,
The NFTGA, like people who work with guides who are at NFTGA, that's a different story than what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ghost tour operator that hires college students for a month of the year and says, "Oh, it's just going to be a freelance contract." That's the part that I think we need to do better as an industry
yeah,
and be employing those people.
yeah.
I should also say that it's better for as a business strategy. Like it's a better environment to be in. People like being looked after. They like being able to uh, feel a degree of protection, I guess, from their employer, and it will make uh, for a less combative environment. When you work with freelancers, it often means it's often a red flag, and I'm speaking from experience because I started working with freelancers. I'm not free of guilt from this. I learned the hard way of having a really negative company culture of people fighting over wanting to have this tour because the tips were better than this tour, and constantly trying to scrape by because I was never giving people what they needed, which was some certainty around how much work they were going to have. It might be that you have to hire people and say, look, I'm only going to give you work on Saturdays, but you will have a payday every Saturday for the next 3 months, and that might be all you can offer. But there are people who want that. Like there's a recruitment strategy for that. There are people who just want to give a tour every Saturday for the summertime, and that's a good way to get started on the employment kind of path.
I want to end with two things that start with T: tips and TikTok.
Sure.
And I know two of these have been recent experiments in the topics that have been occupying your mind. And so I'm interested, especially as we discuss guides and the pain points in the employment of being a guide. And both of us, again, started as guides, and so we know this very well, that tips are a big deal. And there's a lot of variables that go into that. I know you've been working on some thoughts around that. I'm wondering if you could just tell me about what your current thinking is around gratuities and guides as an operator.
I hate tips. Tips are my least favorite thing in the world. I think that they're awful as a society. I think they're a way for, I mean, not just in our industry, but in all industries that take tips. It's a way to shirk responsibility from the employer to pay someone a fair wage. And you hear all the time in our space, people say, oh, well, it's a low wage, but the tips are really good. But as an employer or an operator who uses freelancers in some cases, you can't guarantee that. You can't guarantee how much tips someone is going to make. You can say, "Oh yeah, it does pretty well. Usually, you walk away with a few $100, that sort of thing." But that's not a plannable uh, like compensation model. And my reason for starting this company from the back end perspective was I wanted to create career track opportunities for tour guides. I wanted to find a business model that worked for that. It was fine in Australia, not an issue in Australia because tips were not really culturally a thing. But now I've landed here and I've found this whole world of like our industry being so dictated by tips. And so my competition tells you, oh, you get great tips, that sort of thing. But then they pay them, absolute minimum wage, bottom of the barrel. And so what I've been working on is how can I make it so that the tips that come in at the end of the tour are more predictable. And so what I've been working on is a tip pooling arrangement because the big challenge for us as tour guides is that you'll have a 3 hour tour with sometimes just two people on it. And your colleague will have a 3 hour tour the next day, which might have 10 people on it. And if your average tip per person is $10, well, $100 is a lot more than $20, even though it's the same amount of work happening. And so what I've been working on is tip pooling in the sense that like if you're working at a restaurant and everyone shares in one pot and then distributes it out at the end of the night, we do that in our business, but on a pay run basis, on a fortnightly basis. So at the end of every 2 week period, everyone reports the tips that they got. We facilitate them getting tips by doing marketing campaigns. Hey, did you tip your guide? You can do it here. We can square readers so they can take payments, et cetera, et cetera. We do everything we can to get those tips to be as high as possible. and then we look at the percentage of time each person has worked. So if there's $100 in the kitty at the end of a fortnight, and one guy has worked 90% of the time, and the other guy has worked 10% of the time, well then that first guy will get $90, and the second guy will get $10. And then because we're all working collaboratively on this, we're meeting every 2 weeks and saying, hey, how do we do on tips? So I'm looking right now, I'm not going to use names, but like in the last pay run, guide A made $5.71 per customer in tips, and guide B made $8.17 in tips per customer. And this is before I've done any marketing stuff. So all that stuff about square readers is just not asking for it, just cash people shove in our hands. And now in the second fortnight, guide A made $6.67 per person in tips. Guide B made $11.25. And that's super interesting. That's super interesting because of that chasm. There's a big gap between those two numbers. And it tells me that there's more to be done here, that we can work as a team to make it so it's not $11.25 on average per person that we're making, but actually it's $30 per person on average per person we're making. And that's when you get to the realm of like, I would actually be able to make it a predictable part of someone's income. The challenge is legislation. It's really difficult to do this legally in the U.S.
A, legally. B, what is the guy doing physically? Are they bringing their cash to this biweekly meeting and then divvying it up
Yeah.
in a back room?
No, they're delivering it to me as the operator. I'm being very transparent about how much tips there are. They enter it into Square, so we use the Square readers as a POS for some people's phones. And so at
Mm-hmm.
the end of every tour, they enter their cash tips. They also offer the customers, hey, do you want to do a card tip? They can do a card tip as well. And then the money comes to the head office, and then it gets paid out in the payroll software. So we use Gusto as our payroll provider. And so there's an option to just pay out tips that way. 100% of the tips that we receive goes to the guides, and we're very transparent about that. I would really like it if we had a scenario where our guides are making $30, $40 an hour, but I can't sustain that and have the price points be what they are. But I think I can sustain it if we make the tips more predictable on here. So that's what I'm working on.
What kind of trip solicitation tips can you share that have been effective for you, for your guides?
We end at a bar, we sit down, I buy them a beer because that's included with the tour. And then I give some signals that, hey, the tour is coming to a close. So I don't explicitly say, if you'd like to tip, go ahead and tip. But I have a map, I circle all the places we've been to, I give them hints and tips about other things to do while they're here that's customized to what they've told me about themselves in the tour. And I say, guys, look, I got to hit the road. I've got another tour to give. Even if I don't have another tour to give, that's always a line. I'm just going to go use the bathroom, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to say goodbye to you all, and thank you so much. And then I go to the bathroom, and even if I don't have to go to the bathroom, I just pull up my phone, just sit there for a few minutes, because I'm letting them say, hey, should we tip this guy? And they're talking it over. And then I come back, and maybe 50% of the time, I come back, hey, thank you guys so much. I go to shake each individual person's hand, and then about 50% of the time, there's cash in the handshake. That's my strategy so far, and that's getting me to have an average of about $7 or $8 per person without explicitly asking. I've just hired a new guide. His name is Dan. He's doing a great job. And he, being his American self, I've been away for 12 years, so I'm maybe more sheepish about this. He just says, hey guys, if you'd like to tip, tips are appreciated. And he's doubled my take nearly by just asking explicitly. And so I'm going to continue down this road, and maybe I can check back with you in a few months after we've had more numbers behind this, because we're only 4 weeks into this experiment.
Yeah, I think this is a really fascinating experiment. Have you had any pushback from your guides?
No, and most of that is because the laws are very clear in Minnesota, especially, and restrictive. Companies, if they can offer tip pooling, but it cannot be coerced, and it cannot be. It has to be the guide's proactively saying, "Yeah, I would like to tip pool." And so I offer them a sheet of paper that I've written as like a legal document, and it explains why tip pooling is advantageous for some, but why they don't have to do it also. And so they can choose whether to do this pooling option or just take the money they get, and that's that. And either one is totally fine, and I genuinely mean that. I try to tell them, hey, I think that the tip pooling thing works better for me, but you do whatever you want. That's completely fine. And they can change back and forth as well. It's not permanent. Each pay period, they can do it a different method. And I think those two things, those things have made it so that there's not pushback because I'm not doing anything. Like I'm still giving them the option to do whatever. And all the guides so far have decided to go on this tip pooling journey. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see what happens once someone gets their first big tip that they have to share. Like that might be the pain point. That might be where this experiment breaks. Um, but I think I can come at it from a pretty sincere place because I am giving the tours and I'm participating in this arrangement. And in the last period, I accepted $49 of tips, but I only was paid out $28 of tips because I worked less hours. So I had to give away some money. And so I can show people that like this is not something I'm trying to exploit you over.
I think
Yeah.
one of the maybe great things about what you're doing is that you're also buttressing it with a guide community that is paid employees, that has some of the other strictures in place that gives them the stability to be in this all for one rather than a mercenary that just wants their allocations and their hourly rate and their tips and go home.
Oh, and also I pay them $20 an hour as a flat rate on top of this. So the minimum wage in Twin Cities, I think, is $15. I checked around with competitors, so I'm paying better than my competitors, and I'm doing this tips thing as well. And I should also say that the place that this came from was when I was doing the free tours before. I did this big business model change. If people are interested in it, they can go look. I did a big write up about it on LinkedIn where I went into the numbers. It's more in the weeds than we need to get right now. But basically, what I did is at the end of the tour, when people said, "Hey, you can give whatever you think the tour is worth," that money became company revenue, and then we paid a fair wage to the guides as a flat rate. And they didn't. That was not their money. It was free tour revenue, is what we called it. I'm not sure if that's going to legally work in Minnesota. I'm working with some lawyers here to figure it out. It might not. But what I found by doing that is that most tour guides that I've worked with are not as entrepreneurial as I am. They just want
Mm.
to give a tour and have a fun time and go home. They could care less about this whole like, oh, am I going to make more or less today? If you give them a good wage, they kind of want to help out with the business. And so what we did is we had weekly meetings, and I had a whiteboard, and I wrote the average tips for each guide. It was very transparent. There's no secrets about this. I said what the average upsell rate was, what the average review rate was for each guide individually, and then we highlighted the outstanding people. So, oh look, Caitlin, you made $14 per person on revenue this week. What did you do differently? And she said, oh, I tried this new thing where we did this, that, and the other, and all the team listened and learned, and then we were all doing better. And same thing with the other metrics. And so, my belief is that the rising tide will raise all ships with individual performance. But for it to work, I, as the employer, need to take on the risk of hiring these people and having them give a few tours and hoping that they can collect the tips.
You took a risk in adopting very early in the pandemic a new social media medium that rose meteorically during the pandemic, TikTok. I'm curious as an operator and also an experienced because you were camera facing, you were the guide and the talent on the camera, what your experience was developing a TikTok presence and then turning it into a business proposition for you.
Yeah, it was long and ugly in that I did a lot of really bad videos for a very long time. I started out the pandemic being like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I think I've got all this time. The government's giving my staff money to stay employed, but we can't do the thing we're good at. So we did YouTube videos, we did Instagram live streams, we just did full tours in video form. I looked into doing 3D video, and each one of these videos got like maybe tens of views in the best case. Like it did not do well. We had like a 6 month stint where we were doing daily videos, or three of us on payroll, and each of us would alternate the video of the day, and it'd be a 5 to 10 minute video. And again, like a good performing video for us would be 600 or 700 clicks or views, um, because nobody cares. Nobody wants to watch that long content on it. Then I started looking at TikTok and just I started consuming it, being interested in it, and realized that this is 1 minute limit. They've since increased it, but at the time it was 1 minute limit on the TikToks. I'm like, well, I have a 180-minute tour, and so presumably I have 180 videos I could just get in the bank right away, and so that was where it started. Is just like filming my tour, and like I didn't film it all in a row, but I like went out and took the most interesting parts, and that time limitation of exactly a minute was super interesting and fun for me. It kind of felt like, just trying to time things just perfectly was like a fun, like seeing that timer go down, and I would stretch it or shorten it as needed. That was a fun creative endeavor. And then it turned out there's a just tremendous demand for this. Started in Melbourne. I had videos that got 500,000 views on them in Melbourne, and then I came over here and started a new account, and it's continued over here. So much so that it's now its own beast. So I've now rebranded it as 1 Minute Tours. I bought the domain for 1 Minute Tours. I'm working on how to monetize this side of the business because I'm not finding there's a lot of conversions onto my tours. I think the amount of interest that someone has to watch a TikTok video is like this circle in a Venn diagram, and the willingness to pay $100 for a tour is this circle. There's very little overlap, and so I'm working on is it merchandise? Is it donations? Do I go to a media producer and get them to put this on the web or be sponsored by Axe Body Spray? Or do I do TikTok consulting for businesses? Those are all the kind of avenues I'm exploring. I'll let you know what I figure out. But if I were paid a media exposure, I'd be very well off right now. But unfortunately, I'm not.
The thing I do love about TikTok is that it's not Instagram. It's not just Kylie Jenner and Kardashians and
You're trying to get the name.
I was trying to remember the name. Sounded right until I said it. And you know why? I was just reading an article about gerrymandering, where apparently that gerrymander is named after a guy named Gary, and so it's actually gerrymandering. Oh, really? And so now I can't get my hard and my soft G's or J anything correct. But the thing I like about it is that there's a wide variety of content creators that are not supermodels. I'm not criticizing you in any way for not being a supermodel.
Excuse me. No, you're right. That is the interesting part about the TikTok journey, is that it is, it's a platform that's been most successful with Gen Z. And Gen Z has been marketed to hell. They've seen, there's been a lot of writing about this, but like when Instagram started, it was cool because it took your crappy smartphone camera and then it made it look like a really professional, good looking image. But now as Gen Z has come up with like seeing really polished, like using Canva today, anyone can do a really polished marketing image. And so it's the pendulum swung the other way, is like the kind of rough, organic, like look that's become the thing that's worked with Gen Z, and so they were the original adopters of TikTok. But now it's expanded, and the reason that everyone should be on TikTok is that they are giving so much away in terms of media exposure. My video I posted today, check before our interview started, I was at like 7,000 views for the video I posted. Oh God, excuse me, 7,000 views, and currently it's up to. Sorry, it's at 5,000 now. It's at 7,000. And that's for a video I posted that took a total of 1 minute. Like I knew a little bit about my subject. In this case, I was talking about a big monastery in the middle of Minnesota. But I just picked up the phone and I talked at the camera in one unbroken take. I did no edits for it. I didn't have a special microphone or DSLR. It was just on my phone. It was so simple and easy to do. The most important thing for TikTok is just creating content constantly. It's quantity over quality.
Operators are already, in general, very, 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 very busy. Is it worth the experiment, given that you're still trying to crack the nut of converting those into paid tour takers? Do you have hope for it, or is it? Do you have the luxury of exploring this, but you wouldn't recommend it to other operators?
I mean, any operator can do this because any operator who's giving tours has a commute, and so on your commute, you can do your daily TikTok video. Like you can finish your tour and you're walking back to the car. You take out your phone while you are walking. Don't even stop. Just keep going and just talk for 1 minute about an interesting thing that you'd say on your tour. Don't worry about like taking content that people are going to learn on the tour. No one. That's not a concern. It's not going to affect the business side of things. What we do is that we have really well crafted stories that we have rehearsed many, many times over. And so we have a amazing defensibility over anyone else who has to go think about what am I going to post today. You go mine your tours for content, and then put it on a new medium, and do it for a minimum of 1 month every single day with no breaks. And you can do this in two ways. You can either go out for the day and just do a bunch of videos and get 30 videos and just release it, drip feed them, or just do it like I do, where like you're literally walking to your car and then doing the captions and all that, and then hitting post. Make sure to do the captions. Make sure that you are in the video. No one wants to see a video of a forward-facing camera. You are the moneymaker as a guide. Like that's our defensibility. That's what we're selling. And I think it's worthy of experimentation because like I'm getting the lifestyle change has been so tremendous. Like where yesterday was 4 times I was recognized in the street. I at the state fair coming up, which is one of the biggest events in Minnesota. I'm going to be live at the state fair with the local newscasters on 3 different days so far. They're going to have me live on the air over there. It's gotten so much attention. I've not yet figured out how to monetize it, but I've never had this kind of wave that I'm riding. And I'm just trying to make sure I can stay on the surfboard and not fall off by just trying to
Just
do a brand deal.
the size of your head on a single surfboard.
I know, my God, it's so top heavy.
You're gonna lower that center of gravity if you're gonna stay on that thing. Uh, I've seen you posting clips of yourself on local news and getting a lot of press. Are they approaching you, or are you
Yeah.
leveraging this and making a PR pitch?
No, I'm doing nothing. Like the only thing I'm doing is posting videos every day, and then they if you build it, they will come. That's the wild thing about it. And on top of that, like we are such a PRable story without needing to do a PR pitch. Just because, like, especially if you live in a secondary market, especially like New York might be a bit harder, but if you're in a place that tours are a bit novel, then you're going to get on media by doing this. You just have to suffer through the first week of getting 20 views on your videos because you need time. You need to show TikTok that you're gonna post consistently. You need to give the algorithm time to find where your audience is. But because the nature of our business, the nature of our work is that we are in a hyper local content curation. What's going to happen is that there's no competition out there. Like I bet that 90+% of the tourpreneur community would be the only person on TikTok talking exclusively about what makes their city special and unique. And that's going to be fed out to a lot of people.
John O'Sullivan, you've shared an incredible array of nuggets and wisdom and experiences here. Thank you so much for being on Tourpreneur.
Thank you. Follow me on TikTok, please.
We'll be linking to all of your beautiful websites, TikTok accounts, and everything else on tourpreneur.com. Be sure to check it out.